All right. So 1 week later, welcome back, Kansas City Underground. If you track with us that way, if you're if you don't track with us that way, and this is like the first episode you have ever listened to of the Kansas City Underground podcast, you should probably go back and listen to last week's because we're gonna dive in right where we left off. So, back with BrianJames McMahon, founder of Church Wellco. Give us a headline again. What's that?
Yeah, so Church Will coexists to help the church reimagine its relationship with pain and suffering, really to the intent that we can help reveal the image of God that often gets buried underneath our pain and shame and hurt and the damage of relationships, but yet that image of God that is powerful and incredible and exists within all of us and all of our communities, that is waiting to be seen and brought to the surface, but needs some new imagination to how we go about engaging one another, particularly in context of pain and suffering. Yep. So we just exist to help bring about some of that reimagining.
Yeah. So you're a growing friend. So I'm hesitant to derail our relationship here. But the first thing I thought of was like, do we need to reimagine it or imagine it for the first time? In a Western context, anyway.
Yes.
In a Western
that is fair. I would say that since we have a relationship to pain and suffering, typically it's to avoid it or to conquer it or to shut it down. Therefore, we have an imagination for it, which is why I'm like, I just think that's the wrong one. I would say we need to imagine it in a usweul way. Yes.
Yeah.
So I think we're on the same page.
Yeah, I was just poking at it. I was like, in the Western context, we're like, we're actually preparing for this a Sunday gathering with a bunch of microchurch leaders this weekend, and we're gonna do a bit of lament. And so I was looking up worship songs of lament, and it's like the Psalms themselves are full of it. We have literally a book called Lamentations.
Yes, we do.
And it's just like, what's out there? What are people saying? What would they consider? And so many of the comments are like, yeah, most of the places I go to, it's just like, yay, Jesus overcame, and don't worry, like, stop feeling bad, and only good news. And it's like, there's a lot in the scripture that talks about this pain and suffering that we need to sit in, and how Jesus sits in it with us.
Amen.
We'll get there.
Yes, we will.
But we left the last episode with the cliffhanger.
Yes, we did.
Why don't you just pull us back context-wise into, a little bit of what you were saying about we're following Jesus together in the same space, but we're not following Jesus together.
Yes. Yeah, so because we're in this conversation around discipleship in community and the human component of community, not just the spiritual component of community, and some language around attachment and what does it mean to be attached. And one of that was the question that kind of prompted all this kind of mini series in this was, what is the role of our humanity in the community of faith? And the question of, as we engage as disciples of Jesus, even with one another, are we more interested in attaching to God than we are to attaching to one another? Because I would argue that based on Genesis 2, one without the other is actually an incomplete gospel.
Yeah.
And there is a tendency that we come to contact, to shared spaces, and in our minds, we're doing togetherness, but functionally, what we're doing is we're all individually and independently following Jesus in the shared space. That is not the same as actually forming community and relationship, which brings us together, which asks questions around our attachment to one another. And I think many of our contexts of worship like symbolically look this way, that we're all sitting side by side and looking in a shared direction, which is us. We are coexisting, but not toward one another, not with one another, with our desire to attach to God. And again, I'm just going to be real clear. None of this is in any way wanting to decrease our attachment to God or minimize the significance of the way that we would know God personally of ourselves. My particular critique and the work that God has invited me into is to say, if we do not also pay attention to the way that God has designed us to attach to one another, we will operate in communities of faith with a community in name, but not in substance. And we will actually deceive ourselves as saying we are following Jesus together, and actually find out that I'm just following Jesus in the vicinity of you following Jesus.
Yeah. Which is actually what prompted, I think, again, we're sort of recreating the conversation we had because it felt so rich. It's like, I wonder if we could make this into a podcast, because I think it would be beneficial.
Yeah.
I think the things you just said is really what prompted that question of which Jesus did you meet? I was like, oh, there are people sitting beside me that see him differently.
Yes.
And I need that.
Yes.
And I need that for my long-term formation.
And the reason that inherently also pulls us relationally with one another is because of what it might mean for me to see Jesus the way you see Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
In a vacuum, if we hold it just philosophically and spiritually, you describe your Jesus, and I'm going to add your way of seeing Jesus to my way of seeing Jesus. And now I have more pieces of the puzzle that give me a bigger Jesus. Like in a vacuum, I think that's how we think about it. But if, in the example we gave last time, if the way that I've encountered Jesus is the one who enters in and sits in suffering, and the way you've encountered Jesus is the one who overcomes and brings relief from suffering,
yeah,
what it actually implies for you to encounter my Jesus would be for you to enter into suffering to see Jesus from within the suffering.
Come on.
What it would imply for me to see your Jesus is for me to enter into the victorious overcoming and see Jesus from the victorious overcoming. I can't actually see your Jesus from my position.
Yeah.
I have to move toward you. I have to engage relationally and attach to you and enter into your experience to see Jesus from your perspective, so that then I can actually have a wider lens that is relationally, experientially rooted. Otherwise, we just have these like philosophical puzzle pieces that don't hold power in our lives.
Yeah. I have so many questions that just came to mind. But the first thing that came to mind was, it's why we can sit in rows on a Sunday and go like, oh man, I felt like he was preaching just to me.
Right. Yes.
Because you're interpreting it through your lens.
Correct.
Everyone in there felt the same way.
Right.
But it made me also go, yeah, what's holding us back from wanting to do that? Like I'm in rooms where we're wrestling some of this stuff out for the underground right now. It's been very, how do we lament together? We just created a shared practice of lament that we could offer to the network. It's not done yet, but just like first draft. And it was like, what does this mean? Will people be able to see that if they're not in spaces together and being informed by another? So you were going to take us into a story, though, which I feel is so in the way of Jesus, because we can all see ourselves in stories. So,
yeah. Well, as we ended our last part of the conversation and coming into this, because sitting with the question of like, well, how do we do this? Right? Like I haven't met anyone who goes, you know what my ideal is like following Jesus without anyone else. I mean, yeah. there are moments where we're like, hey, if I can do this without other humans, like let's go for it. But I do think that really in our honest place is we long to follow Jesus in the context of community and alongside others. And the reason it doesn't happen isn't really because we don't want it. It's because it's complicated and it's hard and we don't know how to do this. And I was thinking about when my wife and I started our house church years ago, and it was that we were wrestling with concepts of power and structures, and can we flatten the hierarchy, and can we all be brothers and sisters in the following of the way of Jesus? And there was this desire of like, we are all the same. Let's just follow Jesus together. And as we got into that, there were two elements that we recognized. One is everyone was more connected to my wife and I than they were to each other because we were the ones who started this. And part of the reason everyone came was because they were connected to us, and that was their incentive to come. And so even though we were a small community of 10 to 20 people, we were still the center connection point, which is inherently a power dynamic that is there.
Yeah.
The other piece was my wife and I, who've been in years of therapy and have been back to school and learning about interpersonal relationships and dynamics and how that works. we had more capacity to navigate relational disruptions than the others in our community.
Mm.
And it created a moment where our desire was, let's just all do this together. Created a context where people are doing what they don't know how to do,
Mm-hmm.
which makes a mess of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe deeply in being a community of brothers and sisters, and we are all, there was one Father that we follow, and I believe and I hold to that. And I also think about contexts where you have a bunch of young people who don't have leaders, who come out of contexts of pain, who orient themselves in a shared direction. Some of those we call gangs.
Yeah.
Or cliques, or right, like whatever we want to describe them in our different contexts, because to actually cultivate community has to be learned. And
Mm.
when I read the New Testament, Paul speaks to this over and over again. He's talking about instructing and teaching, and the older teach the younger, and younger learn from the older. And how do we do the interpersonal things? Ephesians is filled with interpersonal dynamics. And in this context, in our community, we've been talking a lot about a love, and we've been sitting in First John for like all summer. And I love First John, and connecting right to what the apostle is writing in the Gospel of John, that says we will be known as Christ followers by the way that we love one another. Yeah. Which to me is fascinatingly juxtaposed about those who follow Jesus will also love their enemies.
Mm.
But enemy love isn't what Jesus said will mark us and define us and identify us. That is something that we are called to do in the way of Jesus, as we love our enemies. But somehow Jesus says in John that our interpersonal relationships are going to be what identifies us as followers of Jesus, which is really hard.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be hurt by you. And so I would rather say, let our theology be what identifies us. Let our spiritual practices be what identifies us. Let our mission be what identifies us, because those are actually easier to teach, because interpersonal relationships now move into contexts of pain and violation and breakdown and rupture and disconnection and hurt, and how do we, and trust and broken trust and betrayal. That is way more complicated. I would much rather put together a sermon than try to navigate a place of disruption relationally.
Yeah, and a thing that's coming to mind now is, I mentioned this in the last episode, in this podcast, typically we frame this around disciple-making movements: go fast, go viral, multiplication, move, accelerate, etc. And we want to tell stories of that. And we long for that. And there is a reality, like we talk about this, I don't know, a while back, of like, there is the outward fast flow, but as it's going, it's not as if everything behind you is fully formed and you're done.
Correct.
So while there is an outward extending to the margins, there's a going deep that will go on, and I think through eternity.
Yes.
Like, I think even there's a glorification that happens. But like, Rob and I were actually wrestling with this idea recently of, I mean, we'll be like him and see him as he is, but I don't want to limit Jesus to like, suddenly I'll know everything about him. Maybe for eternity, I just keep learning more and more because he is that amazing. And so like, the reason for this little series here, which is not to like explain everything away, but is to like spark the imagination and go like, what does it mean to double down in community and be willing to do the hard things, to be willing to enter into the pain, to be willing to go, hey, something was ruptured between us, and how do we move back toward each other? Which I would say, and you may correct me on this and give some better language, is like, there's a reactive work in that, which is always important. Like, restore what is broken is sort of the mission, right? So there's a reactive, and something was broken, let's restore it. But there's a proactive as well, an attachment that's like, hey, we are together. I did introduce you to Jesus. You did choose to follow me as I followed Jesus. But I actually want to figure out how to keep showing up more and more vulnerably with you.
Mhm.
Otherwise, we come about this far and then we stop,
Right.
and then we
Yes.
go forward in parallel again, rather
Yes.
than like continually just moving more and more toward each other.
Mhm.
And as we do that, I think we're actually creating room for others to keep moving toward us.
Mhm.
I feel like I'm sort of saying a lot of words that I don't.
Well, I'm
Thank you, better.
thinking
Thank you,
about,
better, Brian James.
I, I'm really into bonsai trees right now, and that's a whole nother conversation. And
Just the little
about,
snippy snips.
well, it's more about a plant that's dependent upon the caretaker for its sustenance and can't actually develop a root system that can sustain itself. It's more that's been kind of messing with me. But so I've planted a bunch of bonsai trees, and
I'm sorry. I
the,
just have. Is it Karate Kid?
yes, yeah,
I
yeah, and it's just sniffing and shaping, and yes, pull myself back to my East Asia
yeah.
roots and experience. Uh, but the planting is fast. I can plant a bunch of seeds in a really rapid pace of time. Growth is its own pace.
Mm-hmm.
And actually every plant needs different amounts of water and different amounts of sun. And the idea that, oh, I can expedite the growth process just by putting more water in it or putting more sun in, no, actually we will kill the plant if we do not give it the time that it needs for its own growth. So I am for it. Like, let's plant seeds, let's launch things, let's go get moving. And I think even Jesus, his calling of his disciples and his gathering of his disciples was in a rather short window of time. Like, you, come follow me. Okay, let's go. Now he's got his disciples, but now they grow.
Yeah.
The formation of that community of disciples did not take much time. The cultivation and the transformation and the development, that actually required experiences, that required going through things together, wrestling together, seeing things in different ways, missing each other. So I think that's what you're saying is really true, that it isn't that we just, everything is slow and we don't ever move. That actually, no, we need to go, let's go plant some seeds. Like, let's go move.
Yeah.
And sometimes we turn around and go, oh, there's a whole bunch of stuff back there that is just going to take some time, or I'm in a community that's just going to take some time. And I do think that we can overlook that in any model of church.
Yeah.
That's not just like a
Yeah.
movemental oriented. I think that's something that we miss a lot.
So we've kind of got two other questions that we're going to
Yeah.
frame today. We've sort of hit them a little bit, but I want to hit both of these like with clarity
Mm-hmm.
before we wrap up today. It's like, why do we resist communal formation? And then what does this look like practically?
Yeah.
So let's go to the why we resist
Yeah.
it first.
While we are created for connection, right? We are designed and wired, our brains are wired to be connected with one another. We're also hardwired for self-preservation, right? Fight, flight, freeze response. That these two are always wrestling with each other within our own bodies and within our own brains. And one of the reasons that we resist actual being formed in community is in a function of self-preservation, because at some level, I know that to allow you close to me is going to disrupt me,
Mm,
which means that will cost me, which
yeah.
means in some ways there will be things in me that get exposed that I don't want exposed. There will be things that are hurt that I don't want to be hurt, that I hold some things really as precious and sacred. And like, I've worked real hard to grow this thing. And if you're going to step on it, I don't want you to step on it. And there's this element of, to preserve myself, I actually need to keep you at a distance.
Mm,
Now, we miss that actually we don't grow fully into ourselves at a distance, but also we aren't destroyed from that distance. And so often we're trying to find, what's that sweet spot where I have you just close enough that I
yeah.
can benefit without having to be changed, but far enough that I can still protect myself. So that drive for self-preservation is
Mm-hmm.
deep in all of us. And I say this, like, that's not a bad thing. We're wired that way. That's literally in our biology, to say when we are threatened, we protect ourselves. And the challenge when it comes to community is none of us arrive in any sort of community, whether it's in high school or in adulthood, without having experienced harm in some community formation. Whether we're harmed in school and bullied, whether it's our families that abused us and we have those experiences, whether we've been to church and been hurt, none of us get very far in life without being hurt by community, which means that as soon as we step foot into community, we are torn between our desire for connection and our drive for self-preservation.
Mm.
So in our community, when we planted our house church, we literally spent the first 6 months just talking about all the reasons we didn't want to be a church and didn't want to be a family and didn't want to let each other close. And I say this because this goes into the practicality of like, what do we do?
Yeah.
And one of the reasons that we get stalled in community formation is there's almost an embarrassment in saying, part of me wants you close, but part of me actually doesn't trust you.
Yeah.
And there's a part of me that wants community, and there's actually a part of me that says maybe it's safer for me not to have it. But I feel conflicted about that, or I feel embarrassed about that, or I feel ashamed that like I'm not more. So I want to put on like the we can do this and let's go do community hat, even though there's this part of me that I'm not being honest about.
Mm.
But it's that part that I'm not being honest about that's going to cause the problems. Because I'm going to say with my face, like, let's get close, or I'll say with my words, let's get close. Like I use this phrase in the trainings that I do is I can't embrace you and protect myself from you at the same time.
Yeah.
But I have to pick one.
Yeah.
And in the practice that is most essential in community is learning how to name that I don't want you close.
Mm.
Because if I can start to get honest about that, that gives us some room to talk about things, but that is risky because if I'm going to say, actually, I don't want you close, I probably now need to talk about why I don't want you close, which now is talking about my pain and my fears and the risks involved in that is real vulnerable. And if you don't know how to respond to me and you minimize my pain, like we're done, dude. And
Yeah.
that gets messy. So I think that preservation piece is huge.
It's funny. I'm more and growing and more maturity and understanding my own emotions. And one of the things I notice my body do when I start to feel fear is my legs start bouncing.
Uh-huh.
About halfway through that, my legs are like, "Oh gosh,
Uh-huh.
that's good." The only pushback I would have is on the embrace or protect is like a good side hug, man. It's
Now, let me ask you, in your moments of deep pain, when has a side hug actually fulfilled the longing of your heart?
never.
Correct.
Yeah, I was making a joke because I know it's a church thing to do, right?
I know. I just didn't want anyone to hear the podcast and go like, "Hey, we have permission. Like side hugs are deep community." And I'm not saying let's get inappropriate with our hugs.
Yeah,
No,
no,
we
absolutely.
cultivated side hugs for a reason, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
however, not the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious. The self preservation, I think,
Yeah.
is probably the highest, just because of, um, like you said, I do think there's a biological thing that
Mm-hmm.
matters to us. I think, I would respond with there's a cultural reality again of you cannot deny you were formed in a certain type of water that we call Western individualism.
Yes.
And you can act like you're running away from that all you want, but like you put a saltwater fish in fresh water, it doesn't work, and
Yes.
vice
Yes.
versa. So
Yes.
there is a reality that we have to resist that,
Oh,
and continue to resist and
100%.
resist.
I mean, last night, yes, I had a moment yesterday that brought back a memory I hadn't thought about in a long time that flooded me with shame of going like, I hate that that's part of my story. And I hate that there. And like, it messed me up. And I went home and I was like, the amount of shame that I'm sitting in probably means that I need to talk to my wife about this to bring her into this because it's clearly disrupting me. And we sat down and we had a conversation. In the entirety of the conversation, all I wanted to do was disappear.
Mm,
We had the conversation and I was super brave and I stayed in there and was honest and talked about why I didn't want to talk about it and still talked about it and had the conversation. And then when the conversation was done, I still said, I need to go escape for a moment. And I went down to my basement and sat in the dark
mm,
because I needed to be alone. And so to your point, and some of that is like, I'm now exposed and vulnerable and like, that's a real dangerous place and to protect myself. But I think to your point, a big way that we protect ourselves in the Western world is by the hyper individualism that we operate in that keeps us in these safe cocoons that actually we don't have much imagination that community is protective or that community is a
yeah,
place to retreat to or that a community is a thing that can hold us in our suffering. That when Paul says, hey, the law of Christ is fulfilled when you carry one another's burdens,
yeah,
That actually is a really strange verse for most of us in the Western world, because actually you carrying my burdens doesn't feel like it fulfills anything. It feels like it makes me less. It sets me up to be hurt, to be misunderstood. Actually, it is more fulfilling for me to carry my burdens alone.
Yeah,
And
prove
and
what I can do.
right. I go, well, it may be safer, but it actually inhibits the law of Christ from being fulfilled. But that Western framework to say, no, that individualism that is baked in us.
Yeah. I want to get one more. Maybe it's part of self-preservation. This is
Mm-hmm.
the last one, then we'll talk practically.
Mm-hmm.
Narrow windows of distress tolerance.
Yeah.
That sounds like, that's big words.
Yeah, I threw that out in our conversation because, and this does move us towards the practices of, if we're going to be people
See,
who engage in deep community. It's a
I'm here for
great,
transitions.
great transition. Great transition. Uh, it, and this goes to part of the being honest, is that actually I can only handle so much distress. All of us have different windows of distress, and from a growth standpoint, what we recognize is if there isn't enough distress, we don't grow and change, and we just stay status quo. But if there's too much distress, we get overwhelmed, and that's where we shut down and run away and disappear. And
Or give
growth
out.
happens
Yeah.
in that window of distress where we can tolerate it, and there's an invitation for us to actually widen our windows of distress tolerance. And tying into what you're saying about the individualism within our world, that we actually aren't well trained in this, that many of us grew up in environments and homes that dismissed distress, did not teach us how to tolerate it, or powered over or powered through it, that didn't experience it. Things like, what does it mean to just exist in a place of disappointment?
Mm-hmm.
Not to rush to fix, to change, to solve.
Yeah, just to be there.
Even just letting disappointment hang in the air, my
Yep.
body goes, I can't stay here very long. I need to think about something hopeful. I need to believe that I can change something. I need to move out of that. And that's what we talk about, this window of distress tolerance. And when we have a bunch of people that we bring together to say, let's form community, and there's a part of us that knows we're going to disrupt each other, we often overestimate our capacity to tolerate distress and disruption.
Mm-hmm.
And because we overestimate it, we don't pay attention to it, we don't talk about it, and relationships break down, and people get flooded and overwhelmed. And in that flood and overwhelm, they'll blame others, or they'll bounce, or they'll critique, or they'll just go silent, or they'll try to take over. And all of the things that come out of those moments when we get outside that window. And there's this invitation to say, well, we have to be honest that things do distress us.
Yeah.
And we also have to be honest that sometimes I can handle it and sometimes I can't.
Yeah.
And then we have the invitation to say, well, how do I learn to grow my capacity to tolerate distress? Because it is in that distress that we are able to repair the damage that is done. And it is in the repair of the damage that community is formed. Community is started with our hopefulness.
Yeah.
Community is formed in how we respond to pain.
Yeah. Ooh, man. All right. I have to I'm a context guy. I always say that. Like, pull you back to context, everybody.
Yep.
The reason that I wanted to do this and get it on the podcast and for more people is because, we just to be honest, we probably don't talk about the microchurch side enough, because we tend to talk about disciple making stories, move. But we want families to flourish. Like when we talk about gospel flourishing in Kansas City, like the reality is what happens in the everyday mundane stuff of life that and actually the reality is when you create healthy families, like the community that BrianJames is talking about, then those leaders that are being formed in that way, when we talk about multiplying in generations, we're talking about those leaders getting to start their own families. But if we don't help create healthy, whole disciples, and we have half-hearted, malformed disciples, they're going to reproduce half-hearted, malformed disciples.
Yes.
So that's not gospel flourishing and not what we want. So we have to do this work that we're talking about to go, how do we help see the extended spiritual families, the microchurches, be wholehearted? So, bro, we got a whole nother episode, but I want to talk a little bit, at least for a few minutes, about this, what makes it practical before we go to this last one?
Yeah, and what we do at Church Welco is we run slow communities, and I'll share about that here. And the reason we do that is typically I would advise a parent to learn how to parent from other parents, not to learn how to parent from your kids.
Yeah.
And yet, if we're honest, many of us are learning how to make disciples as we're making disciples by learning from the mistakes that we're making, which is a good thing. We want to be learning from the mistakes that we can make. But also there is value to going, can I find other people who are trying to learn how to do this thing that really matters for us to bring into the context of leadership and parenting and shepherding and pastoring and leading movements and guiding people along and making disciples? And so what we do at Church Welco is we create communities for, we call them shared space leaders. And so we try to pair groups of people together who are in some maybe similar stages of family development, if you want to use that language, or we get parents of young kids or parents of teenagers. So we small church pastors and executive pastors or worship pastors or movement leaders. And we kind of pair them with some shared context because it gives some similarities for us to talk about. But we get them together to say, let's practice some of the skills that are actually essential to the formation of community.
Hey, let me hit pause right there just to make a parallel and sort of see yourself in the picture. Our microchurches are what you describe. Like they're either geographically based or affinity based. So if they're geographically based, you know, what pulls them together is like we share something similar, our neighborhood. If they're affinity based, it's like, hey, we're all blank. We all love this thing. So like I just wanted to throw that out there. Like what you're saying is not unfamiliar to us.
Right, because we have to have some sense of shared context. Otherwise, like we just have a hard time gaining traction on anything. And so I love that. And so in that, when we get some people who have at least something to tether them to each other, then we say this becomes the environment for practice. And what we're practicing are the skills. We might say what we are practicing is widening our window of distress tolerance.
Oh, okay.
And we do that through the spiritual practices primarily of confession and lament. And we sit and we know that James says in chapter 5, he says, confess your sins one to another and pray for each other that you might be healed. And we know that we confess to God for forgiveness and we confess to God for salvation. But James actually says there's something in learning how to be honest with one another that does something unique and particular in the community of faith. That as we confess, as we are honest, as we name places of distress and pain in the experiences that we have with one another, that actually healing comes in that being honest with one another in that context. So we want to be practicing confession. And we practice lament, which is, at Church Welco, I frame lament a little bit differently than even when we talk about grief. And I'll talk about grief being how we mourn something that we've lost. But lament being how we mourn something that should have been that never was, or was and never should have been. Right? That when we've experienced abuse as a kid, that is something that never should have been there present. And I don't just grieve it because it wasn't just something that I lost. It actually was something that was put into my life that causes me pain in an ongoing, perpetual way, right? As Paul is praying to God, remove this thorn from my flesh. This is here. It shouldn't be here. Would you take it away? I have to walk with this pain in an ongoing way. I'm not just grieving. Like there's a lament that comes with that. And learning to name that with one another gives permission for it to be expressed. That moves us to what I really believe Paul is after when he says, carry one another's burdens. And so we use the metaphor in our slow communities of a table. We say every relationship has a table. And one of the questions that we're all asking in community is how much can this table hold? And part of the practice is testing the table of saying, can I bring some of my story? Can I bring my pain? Can I bring me? Can I bring it to you? Can you receive it? But the bringing of me and the receiving of you are all skills that need to be practiced. And I think in our communities, we want to be this, right? And just like our kids want to like tell each other stories, but they also don't know how to listen to each other. And so we do need to learn, how do we tell stories? We also need to learn, how do we listen to stories? How do we respond to one another? And even most significantly, in context of practice, it allows us to make mistakes and talk about them. Because missing one another becomes a thing that we lament. Going, man, you were vulnerable and you were brave. and you really deserve for me to see you in that moment, and I missed you. Now I'm practicing confession, and
Mm-hmm.
you're lamenting that I missed you. And in the exchange of lament and confession, as we're holding the weight with one another, what we come to discover, as the psalmist would say in Psalm 139, where he says, where can I go from your presence? If I go to the heights of the heavens, you are there. If I go to the depths of Sheol, you are there. He makes a statement where he says, even the darkness is not dark to you, and the night is as bright as the day. And what we discover is we don't just have a God who turns on the lights and turns darkness into light, but we actually have a God who can see in the dark. And there's an invitation for us as the people of God to learn how to see in the dark. And if I can learn to see in the dark with you, then I can learn to see in the dark with my kids and the people that I'm discipling. And I don't have to drag them into the light to be able to talk with them. I can sit with them right where they are. And this allows the deepening of formation, because I will tell you that trust that is formed in difficult moments is different than trust that is formed in good moments.
Mm-hmm.
And I can laugh with a lot of people, but I can't cry with everyone. But people that I've learned to cry with, oh, I can laugh with all of them.
Yeah, yeah,
I've never cried with someone that I can't laugh also with.
yeah.
And so part of what we do in the slow communities is we say, let's really get intentional about building these skills that sit theologically around lament and confession, psychologically about rupture and repair and honesty. We can use some different language, but really what we're trying to cultivate is widening our window of distress tolerance and giving us some skills to be people who are marked by how we love one another and can carry one another's burdens.
Okay. I gotta go sit with this. We're gonna do another one.
Yes.
And I hope we get into some, like, I imagine there are other people like me who are like, how do I make this practical when I gather next time?
Mm-hmm.
So if we don't talk about that on this next episode, we're going to have to record another one to actually model it. So,
And you hold me to getting practical. My wife will tell me I love concepts and ideas, which I think is part of why God has required me to also create context where we actually do this.
do it. Yeah.
That the risk would be to be a theorist and not a practitioner.
Yeah.
And that's why we do the slow communities. It was I'm in slow communities every week. I'm in a place where I'm practicing these things and cultivating these relationships. And so, yeah, let's talk about
All right.
how do we do it and why does it matter a little bit more.
All right. Next time. See y'all.